Welcome to The Conversation. I am Kwame Thomas. Tonight, Jamaica's 2025 budget under the microscope. Economist Sandre Rhoden joins us to break down what it really means for your money, your business, and your future. Stay with us for an insightful discussion here on The Conversation. Welcome to The Conversation. Sandre, how are you doing?
I'm good, and good to be here.
So, a lot has been happening. We saw the recent budget debate presentation, and so we want to frame this particular segment in a way. It's a fiscal year, an election year when many persons expected political indulgences, but the government seemingly has opted for restraint. My question is, do you think that fiscal responsibility alone is enough, to secure economic justice? That's how we want to frame this whole,
economic
this whole
justice.
thing. Yeah.
Well, fiscal responsibility doesn't go by itself, but it is the first step Jamaica has to take as it relates to its economy getting to the place where we want it to be. And since as citizens we're all shareholders in our own economy, because it's in our doing, our businesses, our working, our going out there in the fields, whether it's farming, whether it's fishing, whatever it is that we do, we build this economy. And by extension, if you consider as having your own home, you have to manage the resources of your own home. So when you consider that, you wouldn't want to be in a space where you have a debt-ridden home, where you're sitting down and you're in a $20 million house, but you have a $100 million debt. Now, you're going to be stressed out in your $20 million house that you own, because any day now, somebody can come for your house and say, I need this money now, which is the position that I think we were in a couple of years ago, which is why we basically had to go on our knees and seek financing and seek ways how we could restructure what our finances were so that we can now pay off these interests. The interests on the loans are really the problem.
Not the loan itself,
not the loan
but
itself,
the interest
no,
on
the
it.
interest,
The cost of the loan.
The cost of the interest payments would have ballooned. You can read multiple books on it. You can read IMF reports, World Bank reports on it. You see that the costs, these interest costs would have ballooned. So yes, the loans were there, and of course, everybody uses loans. The most successful businessmen you know about the place, they've used a loan before. Loan is not a problem. It's taking out a loan that you now have the ability to manage the repayment of the loan over a particular
period of time.
We didn't have that. So when we talk about the fiscal responsibility and economic justice, I think we are doing economic justice because we have to start somewhere. And where we started was getting on that pathway for fiscal responsibility, and where we continue is staying on that pathway of fiscal responsibility, but it can't be by itself. It can't be by itself. It has to be twinned with proper economic diversification strategies that can now lead to economic growth. So our peers in the Caribbean won't just look at us and say, boy, Jamaica manage their money well. The next thing we should hear is say, boy, Jamaica in the film industry now, and they're making millions, billion-dollar industry. The next thing should be, boy, we have to start import rice from Jamaica now, or we have to start import our potatoes from Jamaica because they're booming. North America is taking all their products and we're not getting any. So that is where we should bring the conversation now, which is where I hope the government is going. The Prime Minister spoke about economic diversification, as well as the opposition leader spoke to ideas of economic diversification if the opposition were to take power. So both parties are aligned in that, I think, as it relates to where our economy needs to go next. And I think most Jamaicans are aligned. We want to see growth.
So I'm looking at the Independent Fiscal Commission. They had declared the budget as being credible. What does that actually mean for the average Jamaican to hear that the budget is credible?
All right, let me give a little bit of background about the Fiscal Commission. The Fiscal Commission is a creature created, one of the only creatures created in the sense that it provides us an independent view, a view void of political influence on the economic situation of Jamaica. Basically, it's like a credit rating agency looking at Kwame's books and saying, boy, he has a B++, we can give him the loan. Or boy, his finances are in order, let's go. Like an auditing firm looking in and saying, yes, this is good, this is a good path, we like what we're seeing. That's what they were created to do. Preceding them was the EPOC, which would have been that oversight committee looking at the economy. And the Fiscal Commission, basically, they would have been empowered by the Ministry of Finance and the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, etc., to have the ability to say to us that we're still on the path of fiscal responsibility and we're doing what we need to do. So none of these expenditures are above where we should be, or none of these things are outside of the range of what we've agreed to with our international partners and also what we agreed to internally as Jamaica to where we want to go fiscally.
So when they say credible, then it's pretty much implying that all these things that have been spoken about, they are attainable within the context or the framework of what has been presented. That's what it means.
Right. And then you look at a number of other things which the Fiscal Commission has to take into consideration. They have to look at the NIR, which is the net international reserves. They have to look at how the money is being spent, whether or not we're taking on additional loans, how we're taking care of our interest payments, as we were having that conversation earlier. They have to look at all the things in the budget, look at the disaggregation and say, well, based on what we're seeing here, and the Fiscal Commission is staffed, based on what we're seeing here, this is doable, the right checks and balances are in place, this seems like something that can be done, and based on our partnerships or agreements and what we have agreed to as a country, what we want to pursue as a policy directive, meaning fiscal responsibility is a policy directive now. We want to pursue it, and based on that, this is a budget that can work, and it will work if the proper things are in place for it to work accordingly.
So we see where debt levels have been trending down, right. And for all intents and purposes, it's expected to hit 60% by 2028. How much fiscal space does that open up for us? Because we saw that in real terms, this year's budget is going to be less than the last budget that was read prior to. How much fiscal space does that give us now?
Well, it gives us a huge breadth of fiscal space because, as I was saying earlier, it was a matter of interest payments that would have bogged down our finances, I guess coming out of the 1990s, early 2000s, thereabout. So loans are there, but then loans becoming due, interest payments becoming due, because they pay interest payment, then you pay a loan. Those interest payments piling, became a problem. And when we saw that, we realized that over a couple of years, we'd have seen where the budget itself was being read, and over 60% of the budgets that were being read would have been paying interest payments, paying off loans, paying interest payments, paying off loans, which means that it's roughly 30% that would have been going to roads, education, light, water, all the things that, citizens are going to come out and say, Mr. Government, you're not doing this, or Mr. Government, you're not doing that. All those things were now put in a smaller pie. Because if we're looking at our finances as 100% of a pie, they're in a smaller pie, and our interest and loan, not just refinancing, but paying off those would have taken up literally 2/3 of the pie. So you look at the pie, and it's all of this region over here is for that, or this little region was just for that. Now that we've gotten on our fiscal responsibility train, and I'm going to go into something really quickly on that, what we're seeing is that we're paying roughly, I say 20 to 30% thereabout. My figures might not be as accurate, but 20 to 30% going to debt repayment. And that says, or debt interest, whatever it is we're paying back, it's literally that, which means that a bigger portion of the pie is going to all the services that we need. And then we can talk about things like the Spark and Reach programs financed with government money, not external money. We can talk about the Mobe urban centers. We can talk about the highway in St. Thomas. We can talk about these retinue of projects that were Montego Bay, Perimeter Road, all those infrastructure projects where, years ago you'd be thinking and saying, boy, I don't know if Jamaica can build a new road, and we're really in a sticky spot. But now we're seeing these things come to light, like in real, live, living colors, and that says a lot about where we are. Now, mind you, the opposition and some people in society would agree with the opposition to say they want more, they expect more, and the opposition would say if we were to win, we would do more. And that is because the pie is bigger. So the opposition also admits that we realize that no, fiscal responsibility has made the pie bigger. Maybe we wouldn't do all of these major infrastructure projects in some areas. Maybe we'd focus on this and that. So that is, I think that would have been the theme around the opposition leader minister, the opposition spokesperson of finance speech versus the minister and prime minister's speech, which would be focusing on, hey, we're staying fiscally responsible, we're delivering on the projects, but we're delivering on them in a systemic way so that we can stay fiscally responsible.
All right, so let's pause right there for a second so that we can be fiscally responsible. Just want to remind you that you're watching The Conversation here. I'm with Mr. Sandre Rhoden, economist and public commentator. Continue to stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Conversation. Just before the break, the intention was to get a feel of what you're thinking now. So most persons have been applauding the government for their avoidance of an election spending spree. You know, the question that I have to ask now, is this a representation of political maturity or, well, just general maturity, or is it political, maneuvering? What do you think?
Actually, I think persons on both sides were a bit surprised, because when you look at normal leaders, I had said normal leaders or political leaders, leaders of political parties that have this burden of an election, a must call election. It's not a burden like in 2020 when you could have called it the year after. It was a burden of a must call election on the shoulders of the Jamaica Labour Party government led by Dr. Andrew Holness. Now, we would think and we would expect more, yeah? And I think everybody would be saying, like, we expect goodies. That's what all the analysts were saying, boy, we want to see what's going to come in the goodie bag, as well as the country now has the wherewithal, based on how good we have done with our debt servicing, we now have the wherewithal to run a slight deficit, and the government of the day opted against that. They opted against overspending, even though they have the room to, because we are ahead of our debt servicing schedules. And they've looked against it and said, no, we're not doing it. I think it does represent political maturity in the sense of governance, because over time we've realized in our country, in our politics, well, over the years, that many leaders, many ministers, leaders, as it were, they have elevated their political fortunes above their governance responsibilities. The minute you elevate your political fortunes over your governance responsibilities, you then have a lot of clashes going on between both things, because in governance, you have to ensure that you are on a certain path, you are going about your policy business, doing what needs to get done. But when you look at your political fortunes, you then can avert from that path and make some decisions that you're saying, boy, in order for me to keep this power, I'm going to have to use this governance responsibility and make this decision or that decision differently, which normally leads to what most people would say as better political fortunes.
So you're saying then we are on the right track as a democracy, we're heading in the right direction. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, based on the budget, based on the decisions, and I'll say I give kudos to the technocrats in the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, the technocrats as well at the Tax Administration of Jamaica, the technocrats at the National Housing Trust, and I could go on and on with all these agencies and ministries, because it's not just the government. Despite the fact that they have policy directive, these people sit down and have to work the numbers to bring to the politicians to say, hey, this is what it will look like if you do that. So, you know, and they have to sit down and work those numbers. So I give them kudos for that as well, because when they present that, I'm sure they present proper use cases to say, these are interesting things that you want to do, but this is what it costs, and this is what we refer to as the way to go. The fact that the government is now responsible enough to say, hey, election year or not, we have a path, we have a trajectory. I think when the Prime Minister said a couple of years ago that he's looking at legacy, this is definitely a legacy move. No new taxes, debt servicing, going along the right path, or debt to GDP ratio going to the lowest levels we've seen in many years. I think that is enough of an economic legacy that this Jamaica Labour Party government has so far in their leadership. So
even we know that even a credible budget, you know, can miss the mark as far as compassion is concerned. So we looked at economic justice to some extent, but we want to find out what does that look like now for Jamaica's inner city communities, you know, whether or not we're even close to that. So the question really is, does this speak to the realities underground in marginalized communities within the country, or does this remain what you can call an abstract exercise?
I would say it's not an abstract exercise. I'd say point blank period, more can always be done. More can always be done for inner city communities, because the plight, especially for, I can speak at least for young people in inner city communities, they vary far and wide, but we generally know what it is. There are certain things that need reform, and we see that, and I think people have been advocating for that, and I think the opposition even noted some things that they think need reform across the country, particularly in areas relating to path and how that is administered, etc. Those are things that lots of us think about. But when you look at things that definitely can affect communities in the inner city communities that would look at as low-income communities that we want to raise those profiles, there are some key things that came out of the Prime Minister's speech in particular. One of them would have been the minimum wage being raised by a single solitary $1,000. That's what some people will call it, a single solitary $1,000. But also people would not note that it went up pretty fast, and for a man owning a business that usually pay minimum wage, that can have an impact on how you run your business, you know? So when you look at it, if that's the case though, some people would really like that extra $1,000. It might not be much for you, Kwame, because you have hundreds of millions in the bank, but for a man that lives day by day on this amount, you know, a man that lives day by day, that goes to the corner shop, for example, and buys what they want to say, this is what I can afford, this is what I can use. An extra $1,000 does go far away.
Realistically speaking, I mean, because if we're looking at the cost of living, we're looking at the $1,000, how much of an impact does that have? And do you think that the public, John Poorman, our sister Poorman, will look and say, all right, then the Jamaica Labour Party, or this government is actually doing what it says it ought to be doing, and this $1,000 actually means a lot to me? No, you know, how does that shift public perception? You know, I don't think it's going to shift public perception in a major way right now, because a lot of people don't look on $1,000 as a lot of money anymore. But as I said, for some sections of the country, for some people who, you know, this is just what they know, they've always gotten a minimum wage, and they get that extra $1,000. It does come off a little bit. Honestly, I don't mind that extra $1,000. You know, also people are going to be saying this or that, but for me that would do well. But I'm not just talking about me. I'm saying, yes, it is not enough. We can cry from now you're saying it's
till
not
next year.
You're saying it's not
enough. It's not enough. Right. We're not at the point where we're going to say it is enough. Why we're not at that point is because we understand the plight of the common man, that either way, even though it's an extra $1,000, it doesn't go as far away as it relates to elevating people from one level to the
What
next.
would have been a better proposition, $1,000? Because, I mean, think about it, $1,000, if you're coming from Portmore and you miss the JUTC bus, how would that go? If you go and you run out of egg, you want to buy 3 eggs because you have 4 children, how much of a difference would that make, and what would have been better?
Well, I think for future, I don't know for now, but for future, a lot of people are looking at the very least at a $20,000 minimum wage a week.
Yeah.
At the very least, right? Now that's really high.
Future like 4 years, 5 years, or even longer than that?
No, not such long a future,
Okay.
but in a couple of years we're looking at that. Now, considering, inflation is there as well, so we have to consider these things. When you look at that, at the very least, for some people, that would look like a really nice increase right now. But we have to also be fiscally responsible in managing the economy, because you can't just get up and say minimum wage is X now and not consider all the other factors that comes with minimum wage, especially those who have to pay out that minimum wage. If you have multiple workers that you pay minimum wage and what that looks like. Now, another thing that's important to note as well, that it's not just minimum wage that's important, because some people in inner cities don't work. They own businesses and they own supplies and they have services that they offer, and they appreciate that. Now, for those who do pay taxes, they appreciate the fact that if they make under $10 million a year, they have to pay,
and soon it's going to be under
income
15.
tax, and then it's going to raise to under $50 million a year. That's good. For those who are salaried and in their positions, for those who are young professionals, older professionals, in your profession, and you think about it, that little extra, as small as some people say it is, that little extra comes in when you talk about
down payment.
I didn't want to go into it, but that little
it is what it is.
When you think about the income tax threshold, though gradually being raised, it still comes back as a little bit more on what you already had, and that is something that I think people will look at and say, maybe we wish me to get the $2 million threshold right now, Mr. Prime Minister, but we see that you are at a point where you're saying, okay, we're being fiscally responsible, we're at this point, we're trying to go up. Now, other people may not agree with me, because a lot of people do believe that, hey, we need to be at 2 million. That's what a lot of people believe, because, listen, everybody's going to always want more money.
But it seems, though, that the wiggle room that we spoke about earlier, it gives us the opportunity to go that far, but it wouldn't necessarily be, based on what you're saying, it wouldn't necessarily be fiscally responsible, but it was possible. So the next question, though, because you can answer that and then answer this one. Legal access to electricity, community revitalization, these were some of the things that were highlighted. Are these things game changers or are mere policy holders?
I think these things can be game changers. I won't say they are game changers till they're actioned. Why? We have a lot of announcements, a lot of ideas, a lot of policy proposals, a lot of propositions, and other things happen. But when you action these things and you see a community transformed through these two particular initiatives, the HAJ looking at renewing or revitalizing these communities that are informal and getting them in that formal state and building up where it needs to be built up, etc., and then getting the electricity, getting the water in, ensuring that these are no longer settlements but real livable communities, housing access, etc. All those things sound good. Now, I get the Prime Minister's vision, because I don't know if you know, but he did a thing in his constituency where they built out this nice community and all of that. So, there's a use case, there's a test case. We can say he tested it and it looks like it's working, so now let's do a island-wide implementation. But my problem, Kwame, is...
Don't tell us the problem.
Okay.
Let's just run to the break and immediately we'll hear about the problem and the solution. Continue to stay with us. You're watching Conversation. We'll be right back after these messages. welcome back to the conversation. Just before we went to the break, he started telling us about the Prime Minister's test case. I want you to continue on that so that we can get a full understanding as to what it was, you know.
Oh, yeah. So I was saying that he got, I guess he got partners involved, meaning different individuals that would be a part of that project. And it seems like he got funding. I'm not sure about the specifics of the project, but an entire community, as it were, was developed. And that was a really good initiative based on what we'd have seen in the social media space, right? And when you look at that, you see that there is a possibility for further improvement across the island for spaces that would have been underdeveloped, or whether it's an informal settlement, as people say, some people capture some land and it just became an informal settlement, and these are areas that the government has control over the land and makes direct policy decisions to say, we're giving these people this particular area of land and we're going to formalize it. He spoke to the HAJ being integral in that process, and of course, you know, the entire plan with JPS to regularize a number of citizens, and that whole plan of, you know, the shared paying of the light bills for 6 months. Now, the problem is, people are going to say, we hear the plan, and if it starts being implemented in one area in particular, then, you know, a lot of people are going to start crying out in other areas. So it is a plan that has to be managed in such a way that expectations are managed.
Yeah.
A plan that has to be managed in such a way that people know that, yes, this is happening, the government is doing this through the HAJ, etc. But
And it seems transparent.
yes,
Okay.
and it has to be transparent, devoid of political influence, and thereby you can see a direct plan, similar to how they did Spark, where, you know, they had the consultations, MPs recommended roads, and then based on that, things were done across all the seats. They have to have that and have that outline to say, boy, this is a timeline for this, so that people can know, people can see, and people can understand that these are the target areas. And he did name some target areas, so I give credit for that. But, you know, the transparency for those who are the onlooking public, and for those who are from the communities, because people might think that they aren't paying attention, but they do pay attention. So if I'm from a community that I know my name was called, yeah, I'm looking for it. No. But if in the transparency of it, the government explains that, hey, we're doing it in phases, this is phase one, these are the ones we're starting with, because we understand mobilization of resources, etc., has to be done. So then the solution to that problem is the transparency of the program, it being a program that people can see, feel, touch, understand, and also ensuring that that engagement with citizens is at the forefront of it, so the citizens, as the stakeholders, can feel what's happening, know what's happening, and feel engaged as if their input is a part of the process.
So I have a number of questions that I could throw out as far as that is concerned, but with rising wage costs and the narrowing fiscal space that we see there, how do we ensure that these poor communities, quote unquote, don't become simply budgetary afterthoughts?
Well, I think the government of the day has been looking particularly at rural communities and just communities across the island that need development. The Prime Minister has made many statements as it relates to particular areas. I think he made a statement as it relates to Whitney Grill, St. Thomas. Now we see them getting an urban centre and roads, etc. So I think that the government, whomever forms the government after the general elections, they need to sit down and ensure that the policies that they are putting in place are not urban and tourist area policies. Very key statement I made, the policies that they're putting in place are not urban and tourist area policies. And I say that because I've been doing lots of work on the north end of the island, and those main roads on the north coast are good. Really good. You know, you drive on them and it's, you know,
Smooth sailing.
nice. So if we're looking on other areas, we have to ensure that rural development is properly funded. It's not an afterthought. and we look at what the developing status quo of that space is it a case where they're asking for jobs, or is it a case where they're entrepreneurs? Because many spaces you have farmers, you have tradesmen, you have people, especially in rural communities, that do different things in order to sustain themselves and survive.
Yeah.
And these are proud people. These are people that, them have them farm, and I can tell you a family that farm in Chilan. They have their farms, they're doing their thing. When you come, you don't need to give them anything. They're letting you leave with crocus bag of food. And that is...
Like those families.
Right, that is how they speak. That's the language they speak. So the government has to understand these issues, and some people just want them road fixed. Yeah, some people, some communities, some rural communities just want a proper road for like access to the main road.
Yeah, but the thing is, we have heard a number of times that the government seem to be tone deaf, that they're not good at listening to what the regular man is saying. Do you think that is still the case, or you think that their position is a little better now, where they seem to be more open to hearing what's happening and consulting?
Yeah, I think it's better now based on the budget presentation. I think the budget presentation was, from the Prime Minister in particular, was far-reaching, touched a lot. I think probably if he had the opportunity to speak about every portfolio in the cabinet, he probably would, but it was long. It was really long. But I think also people look at the government, meaning the cabinet and the policymakers at the highest level, and forget that there's another level, the members of Parliament. Now, I come to this forum to say publicly that the members of Parliament have a role, whether it's opposition or government, to articulate what the policy positions are from not just the government, but the Parliament. When a law is passed, etc., they are the intermediaries between the people and the policy-making process. They're the intermediaries. So if any government is tone deaf, I dare say as well, we may have MPs. A parliament.
That's tone deaf.
That's tone deaf. Because MPs...
Parliament meaning opposition and government.
Yes, opposition and government. Because people listening right now, Kwame, will just think we're talking politics. But I'm beyond politics right now. Frankly speaking, I spoke to a friend of mine yesterday, and she said she knows enough about politics to know that both sides don't make no sense. That's her view. Yeah. You understand? And that's because that is how it really should be, is that politicians or members of parliament, councils as well, but I don't even get to them yet, but I'm starting there, members of parliament, they have this responsibility to be able to communicate the policy positions of the government, whether or not they agree with it, policy positions and how it trickles down. Then how they should, and this is my view on it, they should have a development plan for the constituency which they run for, and they won, and they should have a plan for all 40,000 people in them seat or 30,000 people in them seat. They should have a plan to say, boy, these are all the roads, these are the schools, This is what we plan to do over the next 4 years. And they should be coming to the people with that plan. Then comes the councillors. The councillors should also, for their divisions, have a plan. And in that plan, a major part of it is stakeholder management, which would be communicating to the people. So they as well should be saying, boy, this is what's happening. And I'm saying on both sides, because here's what. A lot of programs that a government will implement, it won't be, oh my God, we're implementing this JLP program, or we're implementing a PNP program. No. When they're doing Spark is for every constituency, Reach is for every constituency, Water, NWC, and all the projects they're doing for every constituency. If their NWC is doing non-revenue water in Portmore, it wasn't in Fitzjackson constituency alone, it was in Terry Long, Minister Terry Long's constituency alone. It's in all the Portmore constituencies that they're doing those projects. So the councillors who know that these things are happening also need to communicate that this is something that's happening, because then what happens is that people look on all politicians and say, boy, we are paying them for do nothing.
All the same.
All the same, we're paying them to do nothing. No, I'm not saying, I don't want anybody to take what I'm saying as politicians being perfect or politicians doing their work or whatever it is. No, I'm saying that this is their responsibility. Whether or not they're doing it, is the people. The people are the judge.
We should hold them responsible for that.
Yeah, the people are the judge for that.
So as we ease into our final break now, when we come back, we want to look at the pie that you had spoken about earlier, the idea of the MSMEs, investment incentives, and business ecosystems, because the question that we really want to answer when we get back, the government's fiscal cup is half full. All right? Can Jamaica's private sector fill the rest, or are we still asking too much of too few? Continue to stay with us. You're watching The Conversation. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to The Conversation. We're speaking with Mr. Sandre Rhoden, a public commentator and economist. Just before we went to the break, the question that was there to be answered was whether or not we're still asking too much of too few as far as the private sector being the ones to fill the cup, because the government's fiscal cup is half full. Should we expect that the private sector could just run with the rest of it, or are we asking too much of them?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think the private sector has a role to play, but the government are enablers of the private sector, meaning policies should be put in place in such a way that the private sector feels comfortable in a good business environment wherein any individual who wants to conduct a business can conduct a business, local or international. And I think we've had a very active private sector in Jamaica, and I think private sector has done some notable initiatives as it relates to helping to build Jamaica land we love. As a matter of fact, the EPAC and Fiscal Commission now, private sector has always been a part of that, because private sector has seen the necessity for us to have a very positive fiscal position as a country so that their own businesses can thrive. What more do we want from private sector other than doing business in a equitable way, doing business in a way that people benefit, they hire staff, they contribute to the economy, they pay their taxes.
I'm happy that you look at it that way, because if it's the government's job to create the environment for growth, then I put it to you, then the private sector should be the ones to actually do that growth, because there are two separate sides of the same coin.
Well, then here's the problem. The problem that we've been talking about as relates to productivity then is a problem that inhibits some segments of our growth. Let's put productivity at a percentage to say if we were to solve all Jamaica's productivity problems, maybe we'd add like a 2% to our GDP. That's just me making a random figure to say 2% to our GDP, just fixing productivity. Productivity, far-ranging productivity. I'm not talking about, oh my God, all our workers are sitting down at their desk and their deliverables and KPIs are being met. That is good. I genuinely believe in Jamaica we have other spaces where, just the employees aren't productive. That exists. I'm talking about in public and private sector, particularly public sector, if I might say so myself. But when you look at it, it's not just that. Government has a role to play. When you have me sitting down in traffic, for 2 hours. For 2 hours on Mandela, that's a part of productivity. That's an issue that people have not been willing to solve. That's an issue, yes. NWA would have said they have a project in the pipeline to build the overhead and all of that. Fine, yeah, that's future planning. Yeah, whoo, we're happy to hear it. But that's not the only thing. When did our legal, flexible working arrangements stop working? Or legal, flexible working arrangement, when did they stop working? When did it become a place where, hey, the country is going to suffer if we don't have some forms of remote work or staggered hours? That it's legal. It's literally legal policy. And we have literally sat down and we've allowed this situation. Listen, I am not going to sit on that traffic. I am not traveling at that time. If I have anything to do that I know I need, no, I can't do it because it wastes so much time because you can't sit down in there on your phone because anything can happen. You have to be aware.
Well, that's illegal anyway.
It's illegal,
Yeah.
right? That's what I'm saying. You can't sit, anything can happen. It's not legal. You can't sit down, so you can't get anything done. You shouldn't be engaging in anything else. You couldn't sit down on your laptop in the traffic. And it's like, you can't do that. So you're out there, and I'm not talking about people who are doing physical work, because 90% of the time, those people already have very flexible schedules where they're trying to work around all of these hindrances, which one of them I'm talking about is traffic. I'm talking about these people that work around desks.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are sitting down in the traffic, Kwame sitting down and saying, oh, traffic, and they're just jolly going down to Portmore and Spanish Town every evening. That's a problem.
Yeah, so no, you're talking about the issue of inefficiencies that we need to see how we can scale our efficiencies so that we can ensure that you can come to office on time, do your due diligence, put in what you need to put in, and get home in a reasonable time that you can live.
Because let me say, frankly, Jamaica is independent, yeah?
Go on.
We don't have no slaves. It's slavish to go to work from 9 to 5.
In the traffic.
To then sit down in the traffic. To then go home. You get home by 8 o'clock roughly, depending on where you live. But let me use that rough figure. You get home by 8 o'clock. I'm talking about these people that live, in that side of the world. And you get home by 8 o'clock. By 8 o'clock now, say you have kids, yeah? You have kids, your kids are there, you take care of your school stuff. You say you have any homework, you look, what time is it now? You're at 9 o'clock, Kwame. At 9 o'clock now, guess what you have to do? You have to say, boy, it's time to, you have your dinner, time to get ready for bed. By 10 o'clock, you're in bed because you have to be up by 4 o'clock because you're trying to beat the early morning traffic to even get into Kingston. I'm just using Kingston, but it's not just Kingston.
Yeah.
I can go over to St. Anne. Similar issues as it relates to the different areas of St. Anne. I can go into Montego Bay.
So
similar
getting
issues.
into the urban areas.
Getting into the urban centers present great challenges. So it's not just roads. I want people to understand that productivity is not just roads. It's roads. It's our public transportation system. It's our policies.
Infrastructure overall.
It's our infrastructure or policies that are in place that can lead to better working arrangements. Because what makes, and I started off by saying we're not slaves, because what makes people happy is if it is that while they're doing this work, they feel like they're living, they're spending quality time with their family, not, I'd say to somebody, not traffic time. Because that's what you're giving. You're giving people the opportunity to spend time with their family in traffic.
In traffic.
Yeah, we're building all these parks. And yes, Prime Minister, the people welcome the parks. We're going to build these resilience parks. And you can't go at a resilience park after work. No. If we don't get to a point of productivity, Kwame, where we do all of these things, and I just listed a few. When we look at all the things we're talking about, both opposition and the Prime Minister, the opposition spoke about tax holidays. The Prime Minister spoke about, raising that threshold from $10 million to $15 million. Yes, we do all these business things, but then if we don't look at it in a meaningful way, and I have to give kudos to the Prime Minister, he spoke about speed. He announced at least 2 things under his speed initiative. He appointed Senator Ambassador Audrey Marks, the Honorable Audrey Marks, to be in charge of that portfolio, which means that he's giving direct oversight for someone to literally go in, see where the issues are and fix that, which is great. I give kudos there. The opposition leader also came out and said he himself would lead the charge against the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
So when you look at it, I would say to you that the government leaders have converged on the idea that the inefficiencies are also a part of our growth problem. So they've looked at it as if they were doctors, and they have diagnosed that one of the causes for our growth problem is the actual inefficiencies.
So yes, We understand that. Given the macroeconomic stability that we have been tooting, that has been tooted by the budget, low inflation, declining debt, stable exchange rate, and all of those things, is it now the moment, or is now the moment for private sector to begin some bold risk-taking initiatives, do you think?
Don't you think the private...
Some more bold.
Yeah. What would be more bold? Because I'm seeing takeovers in the market. I'm seeing people acquiring companies, acquiring other companies. I'm seeing new companies burst on the scene. I don't see it in a massive way, but still I think we do have a relatively managed, well-managed system as it relates to a private system where businesses can be created. People can now start offering their services. It's not hard to get a business certificate. You can go and get it in 3 days or less. I think you can get it on the same day as well. I think I got one on the same day. Like it's the systems are a little bit better. The banks, that's another conversation. But the systems are a little bit better now than they were a couple years back. I think we have a better enabled environment. But I agree with you. More needs to be done. The private sector now, and this is where I have to agree with you in the fullest sense, the private sector now has to look on how do we now create a space where Jamaica as an entity, Jamaica as a corporation, Jamaica as a business, and me as a private sector entity, which would be a subsidiary of Jamaica Land We Love, how do I now become not just a company for Jamaica? I think Grace Kennedy is doing well at it so far. How do I become a company for the world? That is where it is. So the vision now has to expand beyond, yes, I am John Doe Incorporation based in Jamaica, yes, but I'm based in Jamaica serving a global market.
Yeah.
Our companies should now be bold with the vision to say we're now serving a global market. That's the only way. And I think I saw Lisa Hanna, Member of Parliament, she put out something about creatives and the industry and saying that we need to now sell Jamaica to the world. We are already being sold, exploited, or image everything to the world.
But as
it's time to commit to it.
As we draw to a close now, a hard stop, on a scale of 1 to 10, how future ready is this budget?
How future
ready is this budget?
1 to 10. I think I'll give it a solid 8. I think
biggest winners, biggest loser.
You mean the persons or the budget?
Well, both.
I don't know who the losers are, but I'd say that when you look at the budget and you analyze both the inputs from the opposition and the government, they both had really strong points based on what they can speak on. I have to be very clear on that. The opposition and the opposition spokesman on finance, they have different areas that they really can speak on. They have to craft ideas for what they would do. I think over the past couple of years, this is the best one that I've seen from the opposition.
All right.
And the government, boy, Prime Minister, that one was long, really long.
It was really long.
But I'd say, Prime Minister, you were engaged, you kept at it, you had your little quips here and there, you had your little explanations. You're on top of your game. I think when you look at it, the polls aren't reading wrong, Kwame, because both the opposition and government, they came out bat for bat, and they were ready for their innings, and they played the balls as they came.
So with that said, now as I close, one word describe this budget. One word.
One word. Sustainable.
Sustainable.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it. Insights meet impact right here on The Conversation. A big thanks to economist and public commentator Sandre Rhoden for sharing riveting insights. Until next time, I am Kwame Thomas. Stay sharp, stay informed, and keep the dialogue going. Take care.